Today I'd like to introduce you to one of English literature's greatest poets, John Keats, a truly extraordinary poet who, of course, died far too young. Let's begin with one of my great favourites amongst his poems, the strange and mysterious La Belle Dame sans Merci. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest's done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long, for sidelong would she bend and sing a fairy's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for, and there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, ah, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame sans Merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. It's a great poem by John Keats, and has been rather beautifully illustrated in different paintings by various artists. John Keats was born in London in 1795, and his life should have been a prosperous and happy one. But tragedy struck when he was 8 years old. His father, who was an innkeeper, was out riding his horse, slipped, had an accident, cracked his head on the ground and died. Now, Keats's mother had 4 children to look after. She panicked at losing her husband, and very quickly, within 2 months, she married another man. This man didn't care for her or her children, and much of the family money disappeared at this time. And Keats lost his mother not too long afterwards from tuberculosis, the disease, of course, that would kill him and another of his brothers. So there was a lot of family tragedy. Keats went off to school and received a fairly good education, but he was not upper class, so he wasn't going off and learning the classics at a top English school the way some of his contemporaries, such as Lord Byron and Shelley, were doing. And Keats was often looked down on by other people for his status within society. He trained as a doctor, and you can still visit a wonderful old medical museum in London today, which is where Keats attended as a student. But he didn't always write medical things in his notebooks. He was starting to scribble poetry in the side. And although he practiced for a short time as a doctor, quite quickly he gave up medicine and became a full-time poet. Now, Keats received terribly poor reviews for some of what he wrote in his earlier years as a poet, and very harsh criticism indeed, which could well have stopped him ever going on to write anything else. Eventually, he was living in Hampstead. He fell in love with the girl in the house next door. It was actually part of the same house, but it was subdivided. Her name was Fanny Brawne, and she, of course, is the recipient of his great love poem, The Bright Star Sonnet. However, by this time, Keats, in his early 20s, was realizing that he was far from well. His young brother Tom had died in his teens from TB, and Keats had nursed his brother and, of course, had caught the disease. As a doctor, he knew that when he started coughing up blood, this of course was his death warrant, so he knew that time was running out. Now, in the year 1818 to 1819, Keats had what's been referred to as his great year of creativity, and very few poets have had a time like that year or year and a half within Keats's life. This is the time we get the great sonnets, the great odes. We get Ode on Melancholy, Ode on a Grecian Urn, Ode to Psyche, Ode to a Nightingale. All of these truly fabulous poems were appearing at this time. La Belle Dame sans Merci, The Eve of St. Agnes had been published, The Bright Star Sonnet is written, Ode to Autumn appears. These amazing poems all pouring out of Keats in what would be the last few years of his life. Now, Keats had money worries. He was always short of money. It's rather ironic to know that there actually was a bit of family money in a trust for him, but Keats didn't even know it was there, and so of course he had no access to it. He wanted to marry Fanny Brawne, but how could he marry her when he knew that he was dying? Eventually, Keats travelled to Rome in the hopes that the Italian climate would do more to help the tuberculosis, the terrible coughing and hemorrhages from which he was suffering. And he went with his friend, Joseph Severn, and Severn was an artist. He looked after Keats in those last very, very tragic months of Keats's life. He actually sketched his friend Keats on his deathbed, and there's a very moving little picture of Keats looking wasted and thin, and Severn, I think, captured the beauty of his friend's face, but also the tragedy that this young poet was dying. John Keats died at the age of 25 in a little place that you can visit today at the bottom of the Spanish Steps in Rome. He was buried in the Protestant cemetery in Rome, and he actually created his own epitaph. He wrote, "Here lies one whose name was written water." Now, Keats thought that nobody would remember him, and of course you can't write in water, there's nothing permanent about that. But he, of course, has fortunately been proved wrong. He is now considered one of the greatest poets that the world has ever known. So go off and discover the wonderful world of John Keats. There are marvellous biographies to read about his life, and of course there's his poetry. Get it well read on audio versions, or read it for yourself, and enjoy the truly fabulous world of the great poet John Keats.